Lucinda Cindi Spaulding is a professor and the director of special education programs here at the University of Lynchburg. She has a PhD in special education and educational psychology, an MED in special education, and a BS in elementary education. Born and raised in Ottawa, Canada, Dr. Spaulding began her career in education as an elementary teacher in a Title I charter school in Rochester, New York. She next served as an English language teacher in Japan. Upon returning to the United States, she accepted a role as a special education teacher with Chesapeake Public Schools before accepting a research fellowship during her doctoral studies. While this is her 5th year at the University of Lynchburg, it is Dr. Spaulding's 17th year serving in higher education, where she has held a variety of roles, including Administrative Chair of Research, Chair of Special Education, Dissertation Chair, and Qualitative Research Methodologist. Dr. Spaulding peer reviews, publishes, and presents nationally and internationally on best practices for inclusive education. She recently received a Fulbright Specialist Award to consult with and support the Egyptian government in their efforts to increase inclusive education in elementary schools across the country. She will travel to Cairo at the end of November to complete this 4-week project. An additional key research interest of Dr. Spaulding is student persistence in higher education, which is the focus of her research presentation today. The Research Center welcomes you and thanks you for welcoming Dr. Cindi Spaulding.
It's good to be here with you all today. I don't know if I had some anxious energy preparing for this, but last Thursday when I kind of took a deep dive to pull everything together, that night I had a dream that for some reason we hit COVID again and I had to give this presentation online. And I have no clue why, but someone I worked with like more than 5 years ago showed up at my house with her children, like toddlers, and her cats. And for some reason, I was like trying to present on my computer with cats and kids crawling all over me. And I literally woke up like, no, it hasn't happened yet. It's Monday. There's not COVID hitting the world again. So I don't know if there's any person who interprets deep dreams, please share. But it's great to physically be with you all here today. Thank you. I know there's a ton going on campus, literally right now. So thank you for being here, or if you're watching later, thank you. All right, so here's the title of my presentation today, and really what I'm presenting on are findings from a phenomenology that I conducted in the last year or so, really looking to describe the lived experiences of college students in the southeastern United States who identified as neurodivergent. I have to share that I did not conduct this research alone. While I was the principal investigator, I conducted this research with Dr. Esther Warren. She's she was a dean of general studies at the time, but she's now the senior executive director of the Office of Disability and Academic Support at Liberty University. And I also collaborated with one of my former undergraduate students who's now a special ed teacher at JF High School. She teaches adapted curriculum. Her name is Genevieve Weaver, and she has an MS in visual impairments. In fact, we went to a conference together and she was once learning how to teach high school math in Braille. So I'll just put that out there. So just to share a little bit about our motivation, because as you can see, this was a qualitative study, a phenomenological study. And so as researchers, our own lived experiences highly motivated us to conduct this research. And so what is not in my professional bio is that I'm the mother of a son diagnosed 2 years ago with ADHD, hyperactive and inattentive. When my son was diagnosed, it actually prompted my husband, when we were going through all the surveys and scales about our son, it caused my husband to self-reflect what he saw on those scales, and he received a formal diagnosis, so a very late diagnosis. Dr. Warren, in addition to being a dean and directing the Office of Disability and Academic Support, she has a son with autism who was persisting through university at that time. So we were the human instruments. We crafted the protocols and analyzed the data through our own lived experiences. So I think it's just really important to share that. Also just want to lay the framework for our study. Neurodiversity, or the term neurodivergence, or neurodivergent, it's used to describe individuals who experience, interact with, and interpret the world in unique ways. The movement really embraces a social model rather than a medical model of disability. So rather than this view that people with disabilities are broken and need to be fixed, hope everyone's seeing my air quotes, it rather emphasizes that we need to look at our environments and see how we can alter our environments to increase access, understanding, and inclusion. Also recognizing the strengths that neurodivergent thinkers bring to the table. The movement was started by a sociologist on the autism spectrum, but it encompasses individuals living with ADHD, learning disabilities, and other developmental disabilities. So further establishing the context for the study, the great news is that we have more and more students today accessing higher education than ever before, more and more students who identify as neurodivergent or students with disabilities. And I'm using both terms because not all individuals who identify as neurodivergent identify as having a disability. So I think it's important to use both terms. And so we are seeing increasing rates, up to 1 out of 5 students who we all teach in our college in our classrooms likely have an identified disability. Again, a lot of times in higher education, we're looking at those invisible disabilities, a lot of the ones that I mentioned. Unfortunately, though, these students experience significantly more stress than the average college student. They are at much higher risk of dropping out or stopping out of college. Their graduation rate, I should highlight, it's for the 6th year. After 6 years of starting, 34% of students with disabilities or who identify as neurodivergent graduate compared to their neurotypical peers at 56%. That's from the latest longitudinal study. I'm hoping a newer study will come out soon. Another thing that is a little concerning is that only 1 out of 3, so 37% of students who identify with a disability or as neurodivergent disclose when they come to campus. And so we might kind of wonder why. And here you can see at the bottom, I know it's hard to see, just the breakdown. So ADHD is, the most prevalent high incidence that we're seeing, followed by learning disability, autism spectrum disorder, which I'll refer to as ASD for most of this presentation. And then we have vision, hearing impairment, and physical impairments, followed by speech language. Let's bring it a little closer to home. So I will share that part of the sample was students from here at the University of Lynchburg. Lizzie Goad shared with me last week that we have, during the 24-25 academic year, 224 students. We are not a huge campus, but 224 students requested and received accommodations. And similar to what the research shares, ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder make up our largest numbers, and sometimes that's comorbid, like where students are diagnosed with both disabilities. Just to talk a little bit about that statistic as to why students, 1/3 disclose, I think it's important to back up and look what kind of supports are provided in high school and elementary, the K through 12. So ultimately, it's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which generally known as IDEA, that mandates the provision of a specially designed instruction for students who are eligible based on a disability, a diagnosed disability. And with IDEA, supports are brought to the child. Special ed teachers and general ed teachers, they collaborate, and year after year, as long as the student is found eligible, the supports come to the child. The child does not need to ask or advocate. Sometimes parents need to heavily advocate, but the supports are brought to the child. But when our students graduate from high school and move to university, the supports don't automatically come to them. They have to be willing to self-disclose and self-advocate. They have to be able to explain that the disability has an effect on their learning. They have to also provide documentation of that, and they have to be able to articulate the reasonable accommodations that they feel they need to be successful. And I'll just share, students with disabilities and students who identify as neurodivergent, talking about their strengths. They have grit, they have determination, they have resilience, they have pride, and a lot of times they start college and just want to go it alone. Just want to see, it's a new, fresh start, let's see. And unfortunately, we tend to see those students especially really flounder the first year or so, and then end up seeking these supports and accommodations. I also want to highlight that these two laws here, they largely affect academic supports or supports addressing the physical environment, right? This is a stage that does not have wheelchair access, right? That we would be looking and saying, how can we give students access to the campus, to their classrooms, to the academic content. But these laws don't fully address the social aspect of integrating at universities. And so I just want to share, sorry, there goes my bio. I just want to share just further context for this study. I've really addressed that already, just the need to develop self-determination, self-advocacy, self-disclose, articulate. Those are a lot of different steps, actually, to be able to request accommodations. But what I was getting at here is a framework that I've really used to kind of frame a lot of the research that I've done, whether at the doctoral level or here more at the undergrad level, is Tinto's student persistence theory. And it's really a theory that looks at how can we retain students as an institution, but more importantly, support students in their persistence. As Tinto says at the bottom of the page there, students do not seek to be retained, they seek to persist. And so really this study that we designed was really focused on their lived experience of their persistence rather than looking at university supports focused on retention. But I want to highlight that student persistence is really the interaction of two key variables or constructs. Academic integration, which those laws that I referenced address, they help ensure that students have the right to access, right? If they have visual impairments, that they have ways to access, the reading and the resources. If they're deaf, that there's, ASL and interpretation and different things. But what those laws don't fully address is the social integration. And in fact, Tinto's persistence theory is, my counselors in here, I see a few counselors, it's really based on Durkheim's theory of suicide, in that when people who are not integrated into the fabric of society, people that are not connected, tend to depart from society or from the institution. And so, it's sobering, but I think it is important to look at the roots of these theories. And so this study, we were really trying to look a little more, not just at the academic integration, but also this social integration of students and supports that extend just beyond the classroom, beyond our area of influence. And then also, given that entering university and moving through and then moving beyond, leaving university, it's a huge transition. How many of you have recently helped 18, 17-year-olds transition into higher ed? It's a big transition. I have a son that just started a dual enrollment, a CBCC. That was a big transition, and he didn't even leave our house. But transitioning to college is a huge transition for all students, especially so for students with identified disabilities. And so really, we used Schlossberg's transition theory, one, to look at how students move into college, how they move through, and then how they move out. And you'll see that framing the research findings. And I also want to highlight this central proposition: how an individual perceives the transition and derives meaning from it is more important than the actual transition. So their lived experiences, not how we all perceive they are living it, but how they experience it, which really motivated our desire to conduct a qualitative study, right, to get at meaning. A simple survey, a closed questionnaire could not really get at their meaning and their interpretation of their own lived experiences. So we went qualitative, and we went with Moustakis's transcendental phenomenology, which really emphasizes, instead of a hermeneutic approach where we as the researchers kind of position ourselves within the study, we are all neurotypical. We don't feel like we can position ourselves as insiders. We have deep, close connection to people who identify as neurodivergent. So that's why we chose Moustakis's transcendental phenomenology, where our goal was to describe rather than to interpret on behalf of our participants. So that was kind of the blueprint for our study. We received IRB approval. I'll share first here, and then we used it to get a kind of a reliance agreement with the other university as they recognized our university's IRB. So we recruited students from 2 universities in Central Virginia. The sampling criteria was that they were 18 years or older. And we did require that they self-identified as having a formal diagnosis. So we did not require them to produce any documentation, but we did ask that on their honor, they shared that they had received a formal diagnosis. There is a growing trend of self-diagnosis. And so we did not go for the self-diagnosis, just the self-identification of a formal diagnosis. We also excluded dual-enrolled high school students, mostly just because we were looking for students that had really entered and joined the college campus. We used convenience and snowball sampling. This study also comes out of when I came to this campus, I found that there was not an affinity group or a student organization for students who identify as neurodivergent, and so Meg Dillon and I, shout out to Meg Dillon, we tried not to form it, we tried to bring the idea to students who might be interested in forming it. Our goal was really that this was student-led rather than faculty staff-led, and I'm so happy to share we have a thriving neurodiverse student alliance here on this campus. And so we did use convenience and snowball sampling of students on this campus and the other campus. We did, I want to share, I should state, I had a summer research grant. I think I'm really supposed to officially highlight that. Thank you, summer research grant, to be able to have gift cards to thank. It was not meant to compensate them, but really just be a token of appreciation for their time that they shared. So the final sample, we had 19 students provide informed consent and complete the questionnaire, just to jump ahead really quick. So we had a questionnaire collecting demographic data and really just to ensure that our students met the criteria, that they did have a lived experience of being neurodivergent. We conducted individual interviews that were semi-structured, so they kind of had a structure and a focus based on our review of the lit, but we were able to kind of follow where the conversation went. And we finished with member checks. So we really felt that it was important to just show our students' appreciation for the time. So we ended up with, our final sample was 14 students. This is interesting, 9 female and 5 male. And it is interesting because statistically, males tend to receive higher levels of diagnosis than females with ASD and ADHD. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Out of the 14 students who we had individual interviews, and all 3 of us as researchers interviewed, about a third of the participants, we did conduct 2 focus groups, and 11 out of the 14 participated. We did have some representation for freshmen, 1 sophomore, 4 juniors, and 5 seniors. And I want to highlight 8 students reported multiple disabilities, which also echoes what we see in the literature. So there's more detail. And I'll share, my email address is at the end if anyone wants a copy of this. I know it's a lot to digest. I have a lot on all these slides. But yeah, we had a wonderful, wonderful sample of participants. And then once we had our data, or I should share, while collecting our data, we went through the process of constant comparison where we first analyzed our questionnaires before we conducted the interviews. That way we had a sense of who we were interviewing and some, things that we could follow up on in the interviews. Interviews were recorded and transcribed verbatim. We all conducted repeated readings. We coded the significant statement. So again, following Moustakis' procedures for transcendental phenomenology. You can tell I like to say Moustakis, don't you? It's such a great name. Then we took those, significant statements, coded them, or arranged them into categories of like codes. Further, just went through that process of reducing the data down until we got at themes that we felt really got at the essence of our participants' lived experience, all the while kind of trying to like hold ourselves in check, having conversations to really kind of bracket out our positionality and our assumptions to be able to really look freshly at the data. Talked a bit about IRB. In addition to that, I should highlight we did not recruit any students who we teach. Like I didn't recruit any students in the special ed major at the time or anything of that nature. We used pseudonyms. Hope you're not guessing the sites too easily. That would have given one away. Participation was voluntary. All students gave informed consent. They had to complete that before getting to the questionnaire. They could withdraw and password protected. So getting to the findings, checking my time here. Getting to the findings, as I said, we organized them around Schlossberg's transition theory. It just felt easiest to kind of organize our themes around those big stages of moving into university, moving through university, and then moving out. So moving in, I think every participant in one phrase or another talked about decision overload. First, just even before moving into the university, just choosing their university. And I'll just share, the students that chose to go to the larger university largely chose it due to proximity, more majors and clubs, and some students referenced a faith-based aspect to their decision-making. Students attending the smaller institution chose based on smaller class sizes, which they directly connected to their neurodiversity, and they wanted to build deeper relationships with faculty as they knew there were smaller, lower faculty-student ratios. Once they came, even selecting the major, some of them just didn't select their major for a while, some changed their major, in fact many. I meant to go back and try to quantify, but it was very common for participants to change their major. I have this quote here that I just want you to read for a minute. A student shared, "Why am I trying to be a hero and push myself with this thing that's obviously uncomfortable for me, when I could be a hero and go do things that my brain is actually, like, not trying to go against the grain of my brain's wiring." Just kind of recognizing maybe engineering or biomedicine, maybe there's these majors that seem good and they might have the academic ability to do it, but it's just going against the way they're wired. And so just making that decision. Several did stop out for a period of time, probably around this time when they were changing their majors, just to kind of regroup, get new direction, and thankfully they returned. Continued challenges adjusting. Missing home and parents was a big one. A lot of them talked specifically about their mothers just being a really strong social, emotional support for them just in that transition. One mother would just drive to campus for the weekend and visit her daughter when she was feeling really overwhelmed. Challenges adjusting to shared living spaces was a big one. Again, I know I have a lot of text here, but I think hearing their voice, if you want to take a minute to read this with me, if you have to have a roommate and you get really overloaded from having to be around a person all the time, I was so incredibly stressed. I could never relax. I always felt like if I was in the room alone, so she's alone, she should be able to relax, right? But if I was in the room alone, she might come in and then I'd be stressed. Or I'd be stressed going back to my room because she might be in there. It had nothing to do with her, just the fact that there was just some person in the room that's supposed to be mine. I feel like a lot of neurodivergent people need a space to themselves. It was probably the most depressed and stressed that I've been in my life. It kind of feels like performing all the time. Think about your work day, right? We perform all day, right? We show up for our students. We're tired, but we have energy and we bring it to the classroom. We give all day and we go home and hopefully can kick off our shoes. And these students feel like they are performing all the time, even in the space that should be the safest and most restful for them. So when anyone who teaches an 8 o'clock class and you have students who might identify as neurodivergent, I just want you to keep that in mind, that stress of performing all the time. And just the overstimulation and the energy that pulls from you. They talked about sound sensitivity, sensory issues, inability to focus in class or study in communal spaces on campus. So as you can see, it's like there was no safe space to just really get away. It could result from anything from flickering fluorescent lights in the classroom, professors playing background music during group work. I've always felt bad that I'm not the cool professor who plays music in my class, but it's important to remember that that helps some students. For other students, it does not help them. Or just checking the volume of the video that you're playing in your classroom, things of that nature. Getting to more the personal, the internal, the intrinsic time management was really difficult, right? Our students go from high school where they have a pretty structured routine day, probably 8 to 3 kind of thing, and so just this variable schedule where they had bigger gaps in the day, they had a really hard time getting organized, and we know that executive functioning, just goal setting, time management, things of that nature can be really challenging for all university students, but more specifically for students who identify as neurodivergent. And just kind of getting at that whole, I talked about just that feeling of performing in the non-academic spaces, but the students just, when talking about their coursework, they use phrases like, I'm being slammed with a truck all the time. Listen to that language, slammed with a truck. Assignment after assignment after assignment. You're sinking, and then the fact that you can't even get back up sinks you even more, and then you start panicking. One student talking about trying to find that balance, he said, if I did manage my stress, then I would get back on time. But if I got back on time, I would experience stress. This vicious cycle of either self-care or keeping up with assignments and just feeling like you can never find that balance. But They did. They started to develop as they moved through. So I'm shifting from the moving in major themes to the moving through. And a lot of it really came from understanding themselves, just having this opportunity to be in the college environment, to meet other people. I will share for 5 participants, challenges experienced in their first year in college served as an impetus to seek deeper understanding of self by self-advocating for an evaluation leading to a formal diagnosis. So part of it, with transition theory, part of the transition isn't just a physical movement to campus. It's that relational autonomy of not living under your parents' roof. And some of them talked about how in high school their parents were like, oh, everybody, by the way, one thing to never ever say to a student is everybody has ADHD these days. That did come up as something that really minimized the participants' lived experience, because it's not everybody. It's 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 that identify as neurodivergent. And so some of them, it was finally kind of having the autonomy to self-advocate outside of their parents' thoughts or views, to go to the medical center or counseling and say, I'm struggling with this. And so 5 of them received either an initial diagnosis in college, or I had 2 students that were seeking a secondary. One, I think, was diagnosed with autism, and she realized there's some ADHD interacting, and another was just diagnosed with ADHD in high school and was feeling like this is a little more than just ADHD and was seeking an autism spectrum disorder. It's interesting too, because we could have a whole other presentation all on labels and diagnoses, but for the most part, the students, when they reflected on receiving a diagnosis, it provided validation and understanding of self. One quote, variation of it, came up over and over. It's not a label, it's an answer. It allowed them to finally understand themselves. This isn't me thinking about something the wrong way. I'm just thinking about it differently. I'm not messed up or anything. It's just because I'm different and I function in a different way. And again, that validating, it was validating that their reality had an understanding behind it. I do want to highlight too, this second point here. For others, it was prompted by self-study, often on social media. I know we talk a lot about social media today and the negatives of social media, but for most of the participants, especially these 5, it was through social media that they first developed this deeper understanding. And as they found community online, it gave them confidence to begin to find community in real life, where they began to self-advocate and self-disclose and seek more understanding and support. So I think that's really, really crucial as we think about some of the benefits of social media. So moving through just some of their strategies to integrate academically. Again, we desire to retain our students, but they desire to persist, and these are some of their persistent strategies that they cited. Visiting faculty during office hours, wearing noise-canceling headphones, so that's something too, right? I want you to remember that overstimulation. So when you see kids with headphones, we can just have biases and assumptions, right? That they're listening to something else, that they're checking out. So I just encourage you to just like Ms. Daka says, just refrain from judgment, just seek to understand. Sitting in the front of the classroom, some of them specifically would sit at the front so that they had few visual distractions between them and the professor. Some specifically sat at the back because then they had no distractions behind them, like there was no noise behind them. They could kind of make sense of all noise that they were hearing, so to speak. A lot of them talked about looking for auditory or visual cues from professors. They loved it when professors would say things like, this is important, you might see this later. Just those little cues to help them discriminate, what's important to write down, what is just kind of background versus primary information to take note of. They all talked about using calendars and planners and timers, blocking out time, pretty much every major area, even the self-care and the rest. I do want to highlight participants noted value in switching up systems every now and then to avoid boredom and to keep the organization system novel. They created lists. They talked about avoiding procrastination, even though there's a lot of cute little memes on social media, but it's not procrastination, it's just planning to do it at the last minute. And I'll share the endorphins that people get from doing things last minute. They do give that energy to persist, but sadly it doesn't leave room for, unanticipated events in between when things are due. And so they quickly learned just getting started. Like sometimes a task would be so huge, but if they would just literally like open the document and write a type, just opening it and getting started was a huge strategy. Several took medication. Some it was against, their parents might not have been for medication and they self-determined that medication was something to pair with other strategies. And then they also referenced university resources like Writing Center, Tutoring Center, counseling, and then our accessibility and disability resources. So that was really getting at the academic integration, social integration, how students, strategies they employed. They would rehearse. They talked about just thinking about rehearsing things they could say to engage in small talk and to meet new people. Positive self-talk, like just repeating things in their mind to give them the energy to go and say hello. Using humor to connect. One group of students created a book club. Another group of students created a forum for sharing memes. They would create memes about everything going on at the university, and you might not want to see some of the memes they created, but they enjoy their creativity. Also, just having that kind of online connection where they had time to process and interact and not have that face-to-face. Sometimes the eye-to-eye contact can be overwhelming, and so just being able to engage with peers, even at the same university, but in an online community. Participants, again, first use social media to develop deeper understanding and acceptance, and as that grew, they developed the confidence to self-disclose, self-advocate, and then seek out community on campus through affinity groups. And these affinity groups really served as catalysts for them to process their identity, to really make meaning of what it means to be neurodivergent in a world that's largely designed for people who are neurotypical. One student wrote, I was finally able to talk about that aspect of my personality more. I was able to learn more from other people and just learn more about myself during that process. And then that bonding, right? We have athletics, we have all these clubs, but for these students to develop a bond over something so central to who they are. All right, so that was the good news. They developed some really good strategies for social and academic integration. But the years go fast, and it was interesting, especially looking at the seniors in the group and the juniors, those moving up. When it comes to transitioning out of university, overwhelmed and anxious were the common themes. There are about 100 different factors that I've never had to think about before, and now all of a sudden I have to think about them. That kind of makes me shut down a bit. Uncertainty about the future, it really scares me because I know that people are not going to be as understanding. They felt that their professors were understanding, largely. There's always incidences, but in general, their professors were for them, they were with them, they understood them, they supported them, they mentored them, they appreciated the campus resources available to them, and that's what really made them scared is, when I leave this environment, what will I do without these supports? It was sobering that few really knew their rights. With documented, again, it was, high school teachers and parents that helped them transition into higher ed, but that transition into the workplace was there was a void of understanding. Participants had very limited understanding of their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act or Section 504. One student, again, speaking to these affinity groups, this club is really the first place I've gone to that even speaks about that topic. I mean, it's more like I don't really expect anything else to, but I really haven't been taught anything about that. One student just thinking about maybe having to move for a job after college, so it's kind of unfamiliar territory as to what would happen if I were to go somewhere else, outside of Virginia, away from my family. What would happen next? Could I accommodate it? Could I live with it? Or would I crumble and need to come back? So, if you're teaching seniors, these are some of the things they're carrying as they're thinking about the future. So those are my findings. I'm sorry to not end on a positive note, but implications, if there's any students here or watching, I think the biggest thing is just know yourself, learn about yourself. Go on social media to discover, and then find people around you, find groups, develop your set of personalized systems and strategies. And you might need to vary them from time to time. Figure out where you learn best in the classroom. Figure out what calendars, reminders, whatever it is. Some students, thankfully I think there's some institutions that are able to accommodate and give solo rooms without a roommate, but simple things like putting a tent Often there's children's tents that you can put on a twin bed. Just putting a tent to just kind of block out a bit of the noise of visual as well as with having a roommate. And my husband gave me permission to share this, but talking about just different strategies, I was walking by my husband, he's a lawyer, he works for the University of Virginia, he's incredibly successful, and I just had to share this picture of his desk. Like, this is his system. He needs the sticky notes, like he needs to visually see it, and he needs to have it there until he's done, and then the sticky note can go away, or it stays, but this is his desk, this is my desk. Like, everything is on my one Google Doc that's like pages and pages long, but everything I ever need, every list, every to-do, every link to every program, everything is on one document. And it just, works for me, works for him, looks very different. So helping our students, helping ourselves understand what works. Body doubling was something that came up, and that's really, a colleague of mine, we do this sometimes, Dr. Gould and I have body doubled, like, okay, we gotta work on this journal article, let's both block out time, we're working separately, but we're holding each other accountable that we're gonna sit and do this work. So body doubling is a great strategy for students and ourselves. I really shouldn't be talking about implications for students versus ourselves, right? Neurodivergence is not something anyone grows out of, right? So I know that I'm likely talking to a room where 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, as professors and staff and parents, can all benefit from these strategies as well. More implications, one student just says, really know your resources before you're in a moment in crisis. Like, the crisis will come, it's college, right? There will be crises, but know your resources, know where you're gonna go in that moment, know the academic supports, but also the social, emotional supports. And I just wanna give a shout out to the Neurodiverse Student Alliance here on campus, and they have a meeting today at 3 o'clock, making a study buddy. As we create, we will learn, we will be exploring ways art can have positive benefits on the mind. So just really getting connected. Excuse me one moment. Okay, further implications is to self-advocate, just especially for those students that have had a late diagnosis, that haven't had parents and teachers modeling and supporting. In self-advocacy is really just knowing what you do well, leading with that, and all of us should always lead with that, and what you have difficulty, knowing your rights, your needs, and sharing that. It empowers people to have access to reasonable accommodations and strategies. One student wrote, and I think this is really great of this student, to assume professors know how to accommodate students who are neurodivergent would require professors to become mind readers, and that's just not going to happen. So just go talk to your faculty, explain why you're sitting at the back, explain why you're sitting at the front, explain why you have, just self-advocate, let your faculty in, help them understand. Implications for institutions. I would suggest we have universal screening upon entry. 33%, 5 of the participants received a diagnosis or an additional diagnosis after beginning college. So maybe instead of having our students come and fumble through and figuring things out on their own, sometimes many semesters of struggle, maybe we could have some sort of screening upon entry and figure out how to support students in maybe developing deeper understanding. Summer transition and orientation programs are huge, especially allowing students to come on campus, especially when there's a lot of sensory overload, rather than starting with, all the students starting, come, get familiar, find their classes, navigate the campus with a smaller number of people around. Mentoring programs and partnerships, so peer-to-peer, as well as community partnerships, really looking at what's happening in the community. I think destigmatizing disclosing, disclosing. I think about it, I've done research on academic mothers and how often academic mothers, we hide our motherhood to be considered serious professors, and sometimes, doctoral students might hide their motherhood. They might make, motherhood invisibility, thinking there might be this motherhood penalty. And so I think there's a lot of research on just showing that we all have multiple identities, and it's modeling how we balance those rather than hiding and pretending we don't have them that really benefits our students. And it allows our students to say, I can be a successful professor like so-and-so and so-and-so, because they're similar to me. So I think if we, when it comes to even if, there are faculty and staff who identify as neurodivergent, sharing with students, not hiding it. If we can have a culture where we can all bring our full selves. 57% from the sample chose to disclose and receive accommodations, so really a little better than the 37% in the literature, but still barely more than half. And then I think just increased training. One of the ways we can be more flexible is just using frameworks like universal design for learning in our classrooms, just being familiar with concepts like masking and stimming, like when we have students doing things and we don't really understand why, just like developing a deeper understanding of neurodivergence. I also think it's important to stop and just talk about the research on females with neurodivergence. Females generally display inattentive behaviors, not the hyperactive, so they tend to be later in getting diagnoses. They have a harder time concentrating. They're better at masking, so kind of hiding or mimicking neurotypical behaviors. Also, the norms used for diagnostic assessments tend to be normed to more male typical behavior with ADHD and ASD. So we see a lot of females, a lot of women receiving late diagnoses. And as I highlighted earlier, 2 female participants were in the process of receiving a secondary diagnosis. So I think just being aware of that, making sure our counseling center, I also share a lot of times students, female students, and I think males as well, but definitely there's research on female students, they tend to develop anxious behaviors that tend to get diagnosed. Often they are diagnosed with generalized anxiety rather than ADHD. And it's the anxiety coming from just trying to figure out what's the primary versus secondary. If the ADHD can be managed, will the anxiety? I need a counselor up here with me to partner with me on this one. But yeah, another huge one is understanding their rights. Going back to the top of this slide, career counseling tailored to students with disabilities who identify as neurodivergent. That is a goal of mine to find, to support the Neurodiverse Student Alliance, to partner with the Career Center to have career counseling that is specific, that does let them know their rights and helps them understand, the cost benefit to disclosing in the workplace. Coaching on how to self-advocate, coaching on how to highlight their strengths and build on their strengths and communicate that to employers. And then providing them with resources and networks in the community to help bridge that transition. The name is a bit of a misnomer, but the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. They provide amazing supports and career counseling for students who have disabilities. I think too, just really highlighting that there are a lot of employers, thankfully, that are really recognizing the strengths that neurodivergent thinkers bring to their companies. High intelligence, careful attention to detail, intense commitment to high quality work, out of the box thinking. There are tech companies making efforts, and the quote that I should read is where they stumble is obtaining the job in the first place, right? Because sometimes those, that cover letter or that initial screening interview, that 30 minutes just doesn't give them a chance to really represent who they really are and what they bring to the table. So just really preparing our students. Implications for staff and faculty. The faculty who they really appreciated were described as approachable, helpful, understanding, flexible, calm, engaging, and passionate about their subject matter. Thinking too, remembering that we can give simple cues that can help students really track with what's important. They also noted faculty who remembered requests, like if a student said, this music is really overwhelming, that they didn't go play music the next week. Just simple things like remembering so I just, if you're someone like me who just things come, whatever your strategy is, whether it's sticky notes or a big Google Doc, just, make those notes about your students to really know who they are and how you can support them. Just you remembering what they told you speaks so much to them. And then just thinking about mixing things up, right? With neurodivergence, things can just get boring if they're not novel. So just figuring out how can you switch up how you engage your students, how you provide opportunities for them to engage, how you represent, just integrating different media and guest speakers, different ways to communicate things, and giving choice in how students show what they know, just really mixing things up, recognizing, that they did struggle with boredom when things were just, so it's hard because sometimes routine is really helpful, but sometimes mixing it up is also really helpful. One thing too that we can consider when we think about class discussions and students who just need a little more processing time, it can be hard to jump in, right? They might have finally formulated what they want to say and the conversation has gone in another direction, and we sometimes don't hear from them. Or if they have communication disorders, that prevent them from being able to or feel comfortable communicating, just allowing, even if it is a residential face-to-face class, putting in some online opportunities that allow for increased processing time for students to make meaningful contributions. I also think too, just looking at theory, right? Are you all familiar with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development? Just really recognizing that all students have a zone. We'd love for them all to come into our classrooms completely ready and all on the same page, but just like in the K-12 classroom, they're coming from all over, right? And so just really trying to understand, where is my student? Where do they need to be? If they're not yet, where we are, how can you get down into their zone to kind of bridge the gap? Even just scaffolding, things that really help them with those huge assignments that can be so overwhelming. It's just breaking bigger assignments down into smaller parts. And what we really want to do is build opportunities for success. I'll just try to share really quick. I have a student, I teach a course called SPED 220. It's, why am I blanking? Introduction to Exceptionalities. It's basically an intro to special ed class. And I had a student, one of the things that we do is each of my students presents on one of the 13 disability categories covered by special ed law. And I had a student come to me after class the day that I explained the assignment, and we closed my door and she shared, she's like, Dr. Spaulding, I have severe anxiety about presenting. And I will be very candid, my first thought was, but you want to be a teacher. My thought was just, but you have to be able to communicate in front of a classroom. And I heard her out and I asked, what are your thoughts? What are your suggestions? How do you meet this requirement for my class? And what we came up with was she decided to pre-record her presentation at home. She played the recording in class. She sat down with the class while we all watched her presentation, but then she fielded questions at the end. I've asked for permission. I share her presentation with later classes as the example of exactly what I want these. She nailed it. And then guess what? I had her a year later, and she got up and she presented. And right now, she is crushing it at a Title I elementary school in the city of Roanoke as just a phenomenal teacher. So the beautiful thing is we have 4 years. Her second year, she was not ready to stand up and present. But the year later, she was. And I think we just need to keep that in mind. Just meet students where they are. Build in success. Even if it's not at the step we want them to be, find a lower step as they increase and have opportunities to be successful. Their confidence and their self-efficacy will increase. All right, so I love this study, but there were limitations and some recommendations. Most of our students who volunteered, again, there was no coercion, just volunteering. Most were white and all attended one of 2 private universities. So this study should be replicated with a more diverse student population, as well as students from community colleges and state schools. I think it would be great. We did just get a snapshot, even though we had freshmen to seniors. They were all, we just caught them at one point in their period, a longitudinal study. Clearly more research is needed on the transition into the workplace and increasing their knowledge of their rights. One participant from our study did withdraw from her university, so looking at kind of a discrepant case analysis to figure out what happened. 3 participants were homeschooled, which was fascinating, 1 from here, 2 from another institution, and so it's interesting, while homeschooling does provide a very individualized environment, it might have masked some of the behaviors that resulted in them getting a diagnosis here or at university. I think we need to look at intersectionality and how different systems that we all operate within, why we have, girls that go underdiagnosed and why we have other populations that might be overdiagnosed. So more research there. I think I'm right about out of time. I just want to, if there are any students here who have anything they wish to add, I'd love to hear your voice, or any staff or faculty. Didn't do a full run through to know how long this would take me and how much time we have, but.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yes.
one of her slides has masking, like universal design. Masking and stimming.
Stimming is like the tapping, just doing physical things to kind of release some of that nervous energy. So just, if they're moving, a lot of times, pardon? Just to know that's what they're doing. Like if you see them with, something in their hands, it looks like they're playing, it looks like they're distracted, like sensory, what are the words I'm looking for? Like fidgets that are really helpful. And so I struggle because being neurotypical, when I'm hearing fidgets, I have a hard time. But yet my students, it really, like hanging out with the Neurodivergent Student Alliance, it's awesome. They're all doing different things. Some are coloring, some are just that idea that doing multiple things allows for the stimulation needed to be able to focus. To kind of, great question. Thank you. Yeah, good question.
I just wanted to add something.
Please.
As a teacher and a student. I cannot stress enough about how teaching these students that are neurodivergent and someone who was diagnosed later in life with ASD and ADHD and other things, teaching them how to disclose without disclosing. They don't have to go to somebody and say, hey, I have this and this. I'm just used to doing it because sometimes we just like to say whatever comes into our mind. I have like a whole lifetime behind me, but they're younger, so they can actually learn how to disclose without disclosing. And yes, it would be great if we could disclose and we lived in that society where there wasn't biases, but we're all humans.
Right.
And sometimes we don't even know, we subconsciously act on our biases. So you can, because everybody has, most people have empathy and they want to help. That's why we get into the profession of teaching. And students, I did a workshop where I was helping, first generation students come into college, and a lot of them were neurodivergent. And when we got onto the topic of disclosing and how to do it, they were very interested in learning how to disclose without having to tell anybody, because they each individually had experienced bias in the high school system.
Yeah.
So it's so important. I just wanted to share that to anybody who's very interested, just my lived experience of this and
Thank
stuff.
you. I really appreciate that.
Because there's verbiage and all that stuff that goes into it.
There is. Would you like to visit the Neurodivergent Student Alliance group? We'd love to have you as a guest. If you'd like to share.
I can. I wouldn't mind, because it's good to like educate and stuff.
I think that's great advice. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions, comments? That's about all I have, other than a few references. And there's my email address. If you have any additional questions. Yeah.
I have stacks of questions. I have a student in one of my classes who, it's the problem of getting organizing and meeting deadlines. And then I haven't had any disclosures or letters or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure there's something going on, because that student, one, will not meet with me, two, refuses to observe the rule that if you ask for an extension, you can get one, but instead just turns in assignments late. And sometimes on time, sometimes late, sometimes not at all, and it's very erratic. And I don't know how to, I've written alerts on this person, and it's on again, off again, and it's almost like the real point of issue is not the work, but rather the rule that you gotta notify the professor and ask for an extension before the deadline.
Right.
What do you do with that? I don't know what to do.
I would probably just advise a one-on-one conference, just really talk about it and really, counsel and mentor and encourage, and just share the consequences too, because we do need to accommodate, but we also need to have expectations so you can share. If you self-advocate, this is how I'll work with you. Without the self-advocacy, here's the policy, and just working to help them develop the skills to get to self-advocate, where you're rewarding the self-advocacy, but not rewarding the lack of meeting your deadlines.
Right, and there's no, I've tried to communicate on me, and of course the meeting was skipped.
Yeah.
It's really, I'm so frustrated, and this person is really right.
And that's what's hard, and that's why hopefully, as has been referenced, if we can get to where we're a community where we're really encouraging students to like self-reflect, understand themselves, be willing to self-advocate, or advocate without self-disclosing, to get to that point. Yeah, it's hard. Yes.
I have a question about self-identifying and self-efficacy, which is likely laced with some bias. So I'm thinking a little bit about how students often have to fight pretty hard to get a proper diagnosis. They have to advocate for themselves to get the world that they live in recognized.
Right.
And I feel that sometimes then, because they've had to fight so hard to get legitimized, I see that sort of internalizing in the way they describe their self-efficacy. In other words, I think that because they're having to use the language that they need to use in order to get recognized for what they need,
Right.
that language then seems to inform how they describe their capabilities.
Right.
Is that documented? Is that something, and do you have advice? I guess.
So I should highlight, my area is really the K-12. Like that's my expertise as a special ed professor. And yeah, I think the biggest is students being able to articulate both together. Like, here are the effects of my diagnosis. This is how it affects me. These are the things that work, and these are my strengths. Like, whenever I have a student who's neurodivergent going out to student teach, I have them write a letter, like literally write a letter where they self-disclose and they say, and obviously they're consenting, agreeing to do it. They're not coerced, they're coached, towards that. But just to say, like, I'm so excited to join your class. Here are the strengths that I bring to your class. I am neurodivergent, and yeah, these are the strengths. Here are the things that will be supportive for me. Whether it's just I struggle to process things orally, so can we put more in writing so that I can, review and read it later? So again, we're not seeking modifications to expectations, we're seeking accommodations. We're seeking access to do the job, not dropping the expectations for the job. So it's just looking to remove the barriers. I don't know that I fully answered your question.
You did. I like the idea of encouraging self-efficacy by asking for strengths. I'm not so much asking for like how can we avoid watering down. That's really not what I'm after. I'm sort of more after how to encourage or cultivate the sense of self-efficacy.
Right.
While they're still having, in many cases, to push pretty hard for their rights.
Oh,
yeah.
Person-centered language.
Right.
Is that like?
I think you answered. You did. I'm just sort of thinking with.
But like I think she's getting at having them be the center of directing their future and advocating where they want to. We do that really well at high school when there's students with disabilities. We have student-centered IEP meetings where we help them articulate their future goals. But I agree, I think in the higher ed, that support is lacking as we transition out into the workplace. And I think there's a need there. And I think if we as faculty, especially when I think praising our students for their strengths, they might not even identify their strengths, right? Or things that they might not even see as strengths, you're good at problem solving. You have to problem solve a lot just to, I remember we had a speaker, the Shul lecturer. Do you remember from 2 years ago? She was in a wheelchair and someone hired her specifically, was like, if you can navigate this physical world, you are clearly outstanding at problem solving. So I know because you sit in this wheelchair that you're an outstanding problem solver. So I think helping our students reframe what they might even perceive as weaknesses as strengths. Any other comments or answers for that? All right.
I have an idea.
Okay.
Have you connected with Christine Harringer over in the career
I have, yeah.
center? Because it sounds like what you're saying would be great to.
Yes, she is on the lookout for someone with expertise. Yeah, her team does not have expertise in ADA, and so we're working to build a yeah, a training specific to that, yes. All right,